So part of this channel isn't just video games and arcade content. I've also bought a lot of cool tech, some of which I've used for this channel and some stuff that I actually use in my professional life as well. And one of those devices that I've picked up that I use primarily for work, but I do find some usage for this channel and other things that I'm interested in, is the DJI Mini 2. And in this video, I'm gonna go over what I've used it for, what I like about it, and ultimately if it's worth picking up in 2024 or if it's worth passing entirely and picking up some of DJI's newer products on the market. So let's take a look. So out of the package, you end up getting a controller and the drone. I know there's other combinations you can buy from DJI. I bought just the standard package. This case that this is housed in was something that I purchased separately just to hold my drone. Otherwise, all you get is just this controller and just the drone with a gimbal cover for the front of the drone. Now, to kind of keep things simple, the device itself, if you actually look at the RC controller, I like the design, I like how it feels. It has a nice hefty weight to it, and it's very simple to set up. You just need the DJI app on your phone, you plug it into the RC controller, and then you just hold the power button down for both devices, and then they sync up and they're good to go. Now, a word of caution and a word of advice, I heavily recommend getting the DJI refresh for the first year, especially if you're new to drone flying. I did originally own a DJI Tello, but those were relatively inexpensive. And so if I crashed them, I wasn't too worried. I did buy the DJI Mini 2, and within about a day of having it, I crashed it. And that DJI refresh, which I believe at the time was on sale for an extra $60 or $70, came in handy. I ended up getting a brand new drone shipped to me through DJI and paid very little to get that. So I really recommend, if you're new to flying drones, getting that drone insurance, as some might call it, on this device, as I think it's very useful. Now, through the time using this drone, a couple things I want to highlight. It has various different video settings. I primarily only ever shot in 4K 30 FPS. For some people, this may not be enough. And if you're looking at doing, rich cinematography for higher end productions, you might want to look at some of the bigger brother versions of DJI's drones or some of the newer entries to the Mini line. Now, one of the biggest things to also address as to why this is called the Mini is the sizing. So in Canada, this is under the weight limit with requirements for being able to fly a drone without a sort of license, essentially. And I have not gotten a license, so I purely bought this drone because, legally speaking, I was able to use this in both, this YouTube channel as well as out in the field for some of my professional work, to actually not have to go through the tumultuous process of getting licensed and getting that backing required, which is kind of DJI's angle for this device, to allow everybody to be able to fly them, but also be able to capture really good shots. And to kind of get back to the 4K imagery, I find the fidelity and coloration, in my opinion, looks fantastic, and you have various different settings within the DJI app to change these things out. I also have found that overall, I can't complain about the quality. I think that the quality itself just looks very sharp and very similar to the DJI Pocket 2 that I'm filming this on. I think, granted, you know what you're doing, the quality looks excellent. Now, there are a couple things that I do want to highlight that I do dislike about the drone, and I think this is kind of commonplace for most drones. The first one being that in lower light settings, this drone doesn't do a great job and the fidelity starts to get lost entirely. And with the DJI Pocket 2, that was a similar complaint that I had. However, I'd argue the DJI Pocket 2 has a lot better post-processing and processing effects in general that you can add throughout both the apps and the device itself to limit that. Whereas with the DJI Mini 2, I haven't found that. Now again, I know for most people flying drones, they're not going to be flying it at nighttime, but even at dusk, you'll find that the visual fidelity just does not look great. Now, the next issue that I'd argue is the battery life on this device isn't great at all. you're probably on a good day getting about 20 minutes of fly time on a full charge. On average, however, 15 minutes seems to be the upper limit, or the normal amount, sorry, that you're getting out of flying time with this device. And I'm aware that there's bigger drones that also carry this, and so DJI is a little bit limited on the type of battery and size of battery that they can put in the device. But if you're someone who wants to use this for a long flight or long usage, you're probably going to find that's a bit of an issue, and you might want to consider investing in backup batteries so you can land the drone, swap them out, and keep it moving. Now, further to this, other than the time limit that you have, I'm very impressed by the altitude at which this drone can fly, and also the distances which this drone can fly. So to kind of give you an example, I myself, from where I live, I'm able to fly this drone blocks and blocks and blocks away, up the street, past everything else, and get very clear shots with very little transmission issues. And I believe that's because the drone's running off of GPS technology, not Wi-Fi technology like some of the earlier DJI drones, or like the DJI Tello that I use. So you're able to still get very good captures, very good visual fidelity, and very good imagery on the actual RC itself at long distances. I also like that the drone has some built-in features like going home. So in other words, if you go too far and the drone loses connection for whatever reason, the drone's automatically set up that it can retrace its steps and go back to its original zone in which you flew it from, which makes this, in my opinion, feel a lot safer and feel a lot less risky when you're going on a long enough flight. Of course, when I say long enough, I'm talking within 15 minutes or so. But it makes it feel a lot less risky, I guess, overall. However, with that being said, one of the downsides to the DJI Mini is it does not have forward-facing sensors. So it doesn't know if it's going to crash into anything. It only really seems to have a sensor on the bottom of the device itself. So keep that in mind when you are flying this drone, that you're pretty much, to be truthful, naked if it goes into or goes towards anything, or if you're not paying attention like I did when you're flying it. The drone won't auto stop or figure out how to stop, and that can be a serious knock at this device if you're trying to fly in a complicated space like a forest or an area where there's a ton of foliage or even power lines that could potentially obstruct the drone itself. And further to that, one thing as well with the drone is you do have various speed settings, but I've found that they're a little bit across the map. So in other words, there's not really one size fits all or an easy way to customize the speed at which the drone moves. You either have your sport mode, your cinematic mode, or your standard mode. And the sport mode, in my opinion, is way too fast. The cinematic mode, some people might find, is way too slow. The normal mode doesn't really, in some cases, capture the speed at which I'd want to fly this drone. However, the different dials and knobs on the drone to control the gimbal and control it as well, they do have good pressure sensitivity, so you are in a position where you're not gonna feel like you're completely out of control, granted you're smooth with your movement. Now, I've owned this drone for about 2 years or so, and one consistent issue I've found, and this appears to be an issue that I've seen on multiple different DJI forums and posts, is that my gimbal, for whatever reason, seems to get randomly stuck. And all I can conclude is that there's probably some sort of debris that's potentially stuck inside the motor. And when I'm trying to lift off, in some cases, the gimbal just doesn't respond. What I found has solved it, however, is a quick wiggle of the gimbal using a pressurized air canister, and that seems to get it back into working order. It's a minor thing, but for some people that might be a big frustration or a big detractor. However, for the most part, I found that it's a minor issue in the grand scheme of things, and for the most part, I haven't really had much trouble other than that with this drone. So overall, to kind of give you some context, I think that for what I use this drone is typically for aerial shots for work. I do things like roof inspections and stuff like that with my device. And I find that this drone works fantastic. I find that it works very, very well. I haven't had many other issues other than the minor grievances that I've highlighted throughout this review. And for the most part, the picture quality I think is fantastic. The biggest thing in considering a drone at this junction, I think, is price point. And I see that the DJI Mini 2 is now starting to go on flash sales, where we're seeing it as low in Canada, as low as $350, which I think is a fantastic price to pay for what you get from this device. And in normal cases, I think I bought it for around $600. I think the standard price is in the $500 range. But a big consideration, I think, if you're looking at getting a drone or getting a first-time drone even, I think this marks all the boxes. It also marks a lot of the boxes if you want to use this more seriously and professionally in terms of good quality images. Granted, of course, you know what you're getting into, and like me, you're not really shooting low light settings or low light scenarios where the drone may lose a bit of its umph. And overall, I think if you can find this at a reasonable price point or on sale, I think this drone is a fantastic starter drone and a fantastic standard drone for anybody who's into filmography or wants to use it like I'm using it for professional reasons, or both. And of course, there is the Mini 3, and I believe the Mini 4 is also out, and both of those devices, the Mini 3, as I understand, has more sensors, way better frame rate per second in the 4K mode. And so you get a lot more features out of the box with a device like that. And if you feel like you need those features, I think it's worth spending the $800 plus that it takes to get the step up drone in this class. However, if you don't need those features like myself, I think the DJI Mini 2 is still a fantastic product in 2024 and definitely worth investing in at the right price.